Turns out she knew what she was talking about, because we've sold out the second print run and today's the launch date.
I just saw something up at the top that said record.
Yeah.
That's a pretty unbelievable result. And this week, on Friday, you probably saw on Facebook where I was astonished to see that the book was made. I'm just distracted by that. Chris, continue. The book was made Book of the Week by the National Library. And once that sunk in, I thought, wow, maybe they need to go to a fourth print run, a third print run. So there's a bookshop in Moree who suggested that the strength of this idea is that we've got an Australian author writing Australian stories and women's stories. And she said, all the women out here love reading strong women's stories, positive stories. So I think that's what we've created. It's a tricky thing to approach somebody you don't know. Georgia Maxwell, who's the cover girl, she's the only person that I knew before I started the book. Everybody else I had to do a cold call and try not to sound like a Weasley journalist trying to grab a story out of them, and convince them that I just wanted to write happy, positive stories and tell their stories without sensationalism or naivety. So I really wanted to dig down deep and get to the truth of who they were and what their story is. A lot of them have a lot of stuff left out because we're not here to give a biography, we're just telling good flying stories. So I hope that's the message that gets out. I found in some of the radio interviews, people are after the feminist angle or the, you know, I don't have any political leanings, I don't have any agenda on any level, I just wanted to tell 10 good stories. So that's what I've done. When I approached these ladies, everybody said, who else is in the book? And I'd rattle off whoever it was that I'd approached at that point. And almost without exception, they would say, are you sure I belong in this book? I'm not sure I'm good enough for this book. Everyone was a little bit starstruck, but absolutely, they all belong in the book. So I'm just going to go through each person in the book and just read like a paragraph. So I'm not going to keep you till midnight, but I just think it's a rare opportunity to read my own work to a captive audience. So there was a lot of Googling. I had to learn a lot about different areas of aviation. So because I've written about Nancy from the 30s all the way through to Nicole, who is only, you know, in her 30s now, it covers 80 years of Australian history in aviation. So there's a wide spread of experiences, opportunities, attitudes, society's attitudes. But it all took research because I'm not an expert in anything, but I had to learn, I had to know what I was talking about. So starting with Nancy Bird in early 1930s, I had to, for instance, contact a friend who owned a gypsy moth and say, could you please go out to the shed and measure the luggage compartment of the moth and let me know how big it is. So then I could talk about how it was only as big as 4 shoeboxes, and that's all they had room for to pack all their tie-down ropes, their emergency gear, their general gear, and their socks and undies. So it's those level of detail that I found interesting and I hope adds to the story, the depth of the story. For Marty Gething, who I couldn't believe my luck when I found a woman who flew in World War II in England. She was the only Australian woman to do that. And thankfully her daughter is still alive, Mary Jane, living in, well, still alive, she's not that old, but she's still around, she is around. And so I worked very closely with Mary Jane to record her mother's story. It took a lot of learning about World War II, and Frank Deeth was a great help in educating me in the ways of the Spitfire and its many variants. The third story is the one that was closest to my heart. It was Pat Toole, and she was the first, she was the starting point for the book. Pat flew in the 1950s in New Guinea. She was the first Australian woman to do that. And I heard her speak at a conference and I was so gobsmacked. We all were in the room, so gobsmacked by what we were hearing. At the end of speech, we were all on our feet, and it was a rousing, cheering, standing ovation. And I have just lost my documents. And so I had to go. I knew that I wanted to tell Pat's story. To get to the heart of that, I had to do a lot of Googling on Google Earth, looking at mountain ranges and the geography of New Guinea, what was happening in the times. And some of the questions I had to answer for myself were that the Torricelli Mountains become the Prince Alexander Mountains at about the point where the Kiang River, which is spelt with an E, not with an I, as per the WAC chart, meanders south and turns into some other river that wasn't relevant to the story. And that Pat landed about 10 miles from Drekakia on the Kiang River. So it must have been in about the area that I marked on the map in the book. So it's only a little map, and I just thought, I reckon it's about there. So I didn't want to fudge details, but I couldn't be that precise. I also had to Google things like how big was the Wewak Hospital in 1952 or 53? How many beds were in the hospital? What did the Port Moresby Airport terminal look like which she flew into? She arrived there on her own. When did New Guinea gain the Papua part? What was it, a territory, a protectorate, or a colony? Where is the fuel tank on the Oster? What's the approach speed for a forced landing in the Oster? Who the hell was Jock McGregor, apart from the guy that rescued her out of the jungle? What's a Luger pistol look like, and what is rum negrita? Was it only the rum used in New Guinea at the time, or is it something more than that? Turns out it's cooking rum and it's very cheap, but that's what they dropped her while she was there. So I'll read you a part of Pat's story that came partly from my conversation with her over dinner the night after I met her, when she'd agreed that she'd love to be part of the book, and partly came from her notes that her family kindly gave me after she passed away a fortnight after I met her. So I really love this bit. It's the proposal from her husband. Though Bob employed her to do the same job as the men, he couldn't avoid having her to house her separately. Bob Gibbs was her boss. A lack of privacy in the men's long bush hut meant she dined in the mess, but lived alone in a simple company dwelling made of local materials. Maybe it was relaxing here in the shade of the veranda after work one day that Colin made a difficult admission to Pat. He thought he'd fall in love with her. He even dared to mention the M word. It was an astonishing moment for the young pilot who was just hitting her straps and establishing her career. While a breeze rustled through the coconut trees, Colin held his breath, but Pat was painfully slow to reply. No, she said gently, shaking her head. No, that's not what I want. I'm too young and I'm not looking to settle down. Dejected, Cole walked away. Envy, however, is a fickle friend. And that evening, Pat spied Cole go across to the tiny hospital to visit the matron whom he'd been stepping out with before her arrival. 65 years later, she recalls that solitary moment with great clarity. I got so bloody jealous, I thought I'd better marry the bastard, she said, and she threw her head back like that, and I roared with laughter. I tracked him down the following day, hoping it wasn't too late to change my mind. It certainly wasn't, and soon enough it was all on. And it started at the hospital. In a perfect case of bad luck and worse timing, before they'd even announced their engagement, Pat got really sick. She got dengue fever. With his fiancée under the care of his ex-girlfriend, Colin thought it gentlemanly to tell the matron not of his intention to marry not her, but the dengue-ridden woman in one of her 4 hospital beds. Pat lay there in extreme pain, unable to even move her eyeballs, and flinched at the stream of abuse that blasted up the hallway, as the matron quite roundly told Cole what she thought of him and his plans. Pat said the necessary injections were administered by the jilted, felt as though they were launched from the doorway, the painful syringe, a physical symbol of Cupid's misdirected arrow. The next story in the book is Gabby Kennard. Gabby was the first Australian woman to fly solo around the world in a single-engine aeroplane, and she still holds that record. I had to write that Gabby pulled into the South Coast airport near Wollongong, and I haven't been there except to drive past it when we lived at Gerringong. But it took me 3 phone calls to 3 different people to figure out that the South Coast airport, the Wollongong airport, the Shoalhaven airport are all the same airport. It's just that it's changed its name over the last 30 years. The maps, I was constantly looking at Google Earth to figure out where Gabby was, especially in South America and Africa, which I don't have much knowledge of. And where in India was Madras, and how did she get to Bangalore? Is that a trip on a bus or a trip on a plane? And then I had to go back to her book and find the details and tell that story. But possibly the most intense moment of Gabby's story for me to write was when she flew across the Pacific and she came into a thunderstorm. Just as she said goodbye and thought she'd avoided the thunderstorm, so she'd been on the radio to somebody, thought she'd avoided the thunderstorms she'd been warned about, a faint flash in the darkness ahead made her shiver. That familiar feeling of vulnerability returned, and it was justified. A tiny dot high in the sky and 1,000 miles out to sea, the Saratoga flew into unavoidable intense storms. The storms over the Atlantic are known to range from 1,000 feet up to as high as 50,000 feet. That's Google told me that. The aeroplane, so secure and stable in calm skies, was tossed about like a toy, and cracking lightning relentlessly lit the cabin from all sides. Ducking and weaving between the storm cells, without the aid of a storm scope to warn of turbulence, lightning, or wind shear, Gabby flew a violent marathon for survival. One of many electrical malfunctions had the undercarriage extend and retract uncontrollably, which varied the airspeed dramatically. And with all the electrics then switched off, the battle continued for 3 interminable hours. The Omega navigation system got confused and finally failed. It had been unreliable all the way and finally gave up the ghost at that point. Through it all, thankfully, the engine kept running, kept turning. Gabby knew she was only as good as that engine. She only had one engine. Whenever I read that, and when I was writing it, my head was right in that thunderstorm, and it still lives with me a little bit. So we'll stop for a glass of champagne because I'm a bit dry.
Cheers.
The next one in the book, thanks, Chris. The next story in the book is Marion McCall, and Marion's online with us now. I had to Google, Marion was married to her husband, who still is, who was the Bishop of Wallachra in South Australia at the time, and then the Bishop of Bunbury. And so she learnt to fly and she became known as the Bishop's pilot. I had to Google the complete geography of South Australia and Western Australia, pore over the maps, talk to anybody I knew who'd been or lived in South Australia and Western Australia, and measure the distances between the silos, figure out where the Murray River actually flows, and at what point it departs from the road back to Port Pirie. Where is Waikerie, and how do you spell Coomaloo? Is Bishop spelt with a capital B? The editor and I went over and over and over that, and you'll have to read the book to see what we decided. Marion won the Dawn to Dusk Flying Challenge 3 times, and she went to England to the Royal Air Force Club to collect the trophy because it's sponsored by Prince Philip. So I needed to know, what does the Royal Air Force Club look like? How many steps up to the front door? What are the pictures on the wall of? What do the front doors look like? Many of these answers were available. It just took a phone call to London, phone calls to Marion, Google Images, emails to the Royal Air Force Club to figure it all out. And this is what I came up with. In midwinter London, wearing a velvet skirt and top in deep red, her favourite colour, Marion approached the Royal Air Force Club with David at her side and 2 of her daughters and their partners closely following. Though she felt comfortable in her clothes, the opulence and austerity of, not austerity, I changed that word, the opulence and colour of Piccadilly in central London and the history and pomp of the club was rather overwhelming. Up the half-dozen front steps and through the large polished timber and glass doors, a starkly different world awaited. In varying shades of gold and gilt, the light reflected off wide, deep-framed photographs and oil paintings, portraits, battle scenes, the framed crest of every Imperial Air Force, Churchill, Bristol box kites from the 1800s to Chinook helicopters in Iraq in the early 2000s. It was all there, lining the walls, lining the richly painted walls and holding up traditions and values and a national sense of pride that spanned the club's 80-year-old history and belong. For Marion, it landed like a slap. God love you, Marion. I'm going to go there one day. The next story is a cracker. It's possibly the strongest story in the book, or the one I've had the most response to so far. I had a woman call me the other day and she said she was sobbing through most of this story because she's a friend of Lynn's, even though she'd had dinner or drinks with Lynn since and knew that she survived intact. But to dive into the nitty-gritty of that story apparently was quite something for her friend. So Lynn had to ditch her aircraft into the Pacific Ocean, 500 miles from Hawaii. The challenge for me in this story was getting everybody's angles, not because Lynn's so understated. She said, "Oh no, it was all good." And I felt that the words coming out of her mouth were greatly at odds with the tone of her voice. And so I thank everybody else involved in this story for sharing their experiences with me. I was rather nervous asking Lynn to relive this story, and also her co-pilot Christian to dive back into the experience, because it's a big thing to ask somebody to do. And because neither of them, I don't think, have ever put their hand up to jump up and tell the story publicly. Perhaps maybe not the way I've done it either. This part of the story is particularly telling. It's not the most dramatic part of the story, but it is one part where I pulled together lots of people's opinions to get what I got. 4.5 hours into the emergency, the US Coast Guard was finally close enough to talk directly to the pilots via the radio. They issued a new heading and a rendezvous point for the ship. Everybody stopped in their tracks when United Airlines captain came on the radio. "God bless you," she said to the surprised Lynn. "We're praying for you." Prayers. Lynn acknowledged the woman, then with damp eyes put it out of her mind. When the GPS coordinates closed in on their target, Lynn and Christian aimed for it. They're aiming for the ship. Christian's final words to Tom and Ray were in the other airplane and they had to go on to Hawaii. Christian's final words to Tom were wrenching. "Please say goodbye to my wife if we don't make it." Dumbstruck, Tom replied, "I'll be waiting for you in Hawaii with a case of beer." Lynn paused. Beyond the radio chatter, navigation and flight management, she drew a deep breath as she started the descent, and deafened by the pulse pounding in her ears, wondered, is this it? That's a hell of a tale. And I thank them for letting me tell it. The next lady should be known to everybody, and if she's not, she will be after this. Her story is studied in the legal fraternity in Victoria. It's part of the law syllabus. And she said herself that she didn't appreciate what she'd gone through really until afterwards, when looking back on it, and she understood the enormity of what she went through to gain the right to be the first female Australian woman to fly for a major commercial airline. And that's Deborah Laurie, who took Reg Ansett all the way to the High Court in 1979. To try and get my head around what it must have been like for a 23 or 4 or 5-year-old to be in a courtroom with clever lawyers telling her who she was and who she wasn't, and what they thought of women and what they thought of her, I went to the Supreme Court one day in Melbourne, and just to try and put myself in her shoes. And here's what I wrote. "Down in the lower end of town, the Supreme Court in William Street is as sombre as the southern weather. On a midwinter's day, Deb ascended the court's 8 stone steps, which have worn but not softened over 100 years of receiving judge and juror, plaintiff and defendant. Under the double-sized bronze figure of Lady Justice that sits high above the double-arched columns, she crossed the veranda, pushed the brass plate on the front door, and entered the same building where Ned Kelly was tried 90 years beforehand. Ansett went into the Supreme Court challenging the orders of the board and the authority that empowered them. Publicly, Deb said it was like water off a duck's back. That was putting a brave face on it. Having to sit in court and have her character picked to pieces, listen to grown men tell lies about her, and read the negative statements in the newspapers was crippling. And when the Ansett Queen's Counsel turned to Deb in the courtroom, nastily reiterating why the company didn't want to employ her, she could only feel that it was personal. It's a very famous case. The next one is our cover girl. Georgia, put your hand up. I know you're putting your hand up somewhere. In fact, I'll put your hand up for you. There's the book. There she is, a little button down there on the wing, like a little moth on an aeroplane wing. Georgia's the only person I knew before I started the book, and I was desperately hoping she'd agree to be in it because I'd already profiled her for Outback magazine. She was an ag pilot and a firebomber pilot, and the only female doing that for most of her 15 or 16-year career. There were a few that came into the industry just in the last few years that she was there. She's been out of it now for about 3 years, I think, while she takes time out to raise her kids. One of the tricks with this story was to show the drama of flying without frightening the children, without frightening the readers, or being sensational, because it is sensational to watch, but it's a very calculated, controlled job. I did ask her to relive the training though, and this is how it went. As she was flying around with her boss, putting all her strength into it. For a beginner, it takes a lot of strength and ability to manage the flaps with one hand and maintain direction and height, holding the control column with the other, coordinating with the feet in the turns. A driving equivalent would be the physical and mental dexterity of a rally driver, intent on steering, accelerating, and shifting gears around the mountainside. She put all of her grunt into it. Her boss, Ross, who was doing her training. Ross is a man of few words and quite averse to women swearing, but Miss Wall wasn't running for Miss World. She was here to be an ag pilot. So Ross wasn't sure which way to look when Georgia let fly with some particularly well-chosen words, ground out through gritted teeth, as she gave 110%, exerting her utmost into reefing on that last stage of flap. Holding onto the aeroplane and booting it around in the turns. 6 years of maintaining her focus, fending off well-meaning concerns, and of having to prove herself were riding on this training, and in rivers of sweat, she wrested the control of the aeroplane and of the procedures. Good job, Georgia. Georgia's also been a great support to me. I've named her my first officer on the book. So I think she's always flown as captain when she's in the plane, but as far as book jobs go, she does a great job. The next story is Nicole Forrester. Nicole's got to work she's got to get up at 4 o'clock, I think, so I'm not sure if she's online. I told her to go and get some sleep and we'd send her the postcard. Nicole's now a RAF pilot, and I heard her speak at the Women Pilots Conference to the group, and she was so funny and so self-deprecating that I just thought, I love her and I want to have her in my book. So she agreed, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the hotel room in Bendigo, I think it was, and Nicole sat on the edge of the couch, carefully choosing her words. So she's now a RAF pilot, but the story is about her early flying days on a cattle station in Northern Territory. And I just thought it was hilarious as she recounted trying to get her head around this new job and how she actually had no idea what she was doing. So she's a city girl from Brisbane. So she's arrived on the cattle station, and this is how it went. So this on day one. The settlement was set around a lightly treed, well-watered lawn that defied its stark surroundings. From the wraparound veranda of the large manager's house, the boss could keep an eye on the other few houses, kitchen, butcher's shop, office, storerooms, clinic, and Jackaroo Jillaroo quarters that housed everybody, down to the most junior of the station's 50 workers. The nearest neighbours, and for that matter everybody in Nicole's address book, lived somewhere east beyond the curvature of the earth. So she's a fair way out there. The moment of truth came after crossing the timber floors when she heaved her suitcases up onto the single bed and stared blankly at her new shirts, because she'd been sent to a country store to buy some country clothes. She was normally in leather on her motorbike or in lycra, you know, she was action girl and a city girl. But she stared blankly at her new shirts, her cowgirl shirts. One of them had to come out. Within a couple of hours, she was wearing it at the stock camp, gagging at the assault of sweat, poo, blood, and bull dust. Her job as the station pilot would be interspersed with regular chores, and when not flying, the pilot is expected to muck in with everybody else, which includes the stockyards. As the heat and dust crusted her sweaty face, she shifted in her crisp clothes and peered out from under her stiff new hat, the Kubra hat, wondering how this would all pan out. Her colleagues worriedly looked back at her and wondered the same thing. Her nerves didn't ease the following morning at muster when 19 co-workers assembled in the courtyard for staff briefing. Thankfully, nobody pointed out how overdressed she was. They didn't need to. They could see the glint of the fancy pearl shirt buttons, and it was painfully obvious that she was looking more rodeo queen than station hand. So she must have gone to the wrong section of the country store. She dropped her gaze to her stiff new boots, elastic-sided boots, and reminded herself how lucky she was to have got this difficult first job. I think Nicole's story is just a great story in just get out there and do it, and do what you got to do, and make the most of it. So I thought Nicole's story was the last story in the book, and a good one to finish on because it was just light and pretty happy sort of story. And then the publisher came back and said, well, 9 Australian women pilots sounds like you couldn't find 10. So can you go and find another one? This was in January this year. And so they asked if I could find, I did actually consider Emma, who flies for Matt Hall. Matt, who very kindly wrote an endorsement for the cover of the book. But they wanted, but she has only just started her career, and I kind of wanted to save her until she's a bit older and we can get more out of her. But so they asked me if I could find an RFDS story, and Anna Wakelin said, you have to go and interview Esther. So I went over to Adelaide for 3 days with my daughter, and I was gobsmacked at what I heard. And so it was quite a challenge and quite a job to squeeze Esther's story into only 7,000 words. And again, to not frighten the children, but to talk about the challenges. She had a lot of drama. She overcame it all, and she got her dream job. And but what I particularly love about hers was the GA element, the general aviation element, where everybody in GA is broke and looking for work, and Esther was no different. And so I'm going to read you the start of her story, which I think reads like the start of an Australian film. Darwin was literally the end and the beginning of the road. Just north of Alice Springs, at the Tanami Road turnoff, Esther had to make a decision. Go left to Kununurra or continue on. She asked a passing truck driver for advice. He looked at the young blonde Dutch girl driving alone in her little car, and he drawled, "Darling, the wet season's going to be a bad one. Go straight to Darwin." Esther took him at his word and pushed on up the Stuart Highway before the road was cut by floodwaters. As a fresh pilot with only 250 hours, Esther had set out from Sydney to find work. Over the Blue Mountains, she drove as far as Dubbo. She couldn't think any further than that, but when she got to Dubbo, the age-old technique of knocking on hangar doors didn't yield any results, so she couldn't find a job. So she kept driving west towards the Flinders Ranges, north to Alice Springs and beyond, making inquiries all the way. The 26-year-old had her eyes on flying for the RFDS. It was a big dream, but it had to start somewhere. And right now, it was starting in the Territory capital, at the friendly and relaxed youth hostel on Mitchell Street. With $7 to her name, yes, $7, money was tight, desperate in fact. Outside, she did tell me the other day that she could have asked her father for money, but she was too proud. Outside, the Datsun Sunny was packed with her worldly goods, clothes, books, camera, but most importantly, her nav bag and logbook. But none of this would pay the rent. She'd get her jewellery back when she came up with some cash, but for now it was security against her rent. First, she undid the gold necklace and put it on the counter. Then she handed over her watch, gold without a chain and clasp, keeping perfect Swiss time. It had been her mother's. That's the end of the book. Over to you, Chris.
Cool. Very, very enjoyable. Hopefully that's gotten everyone excited to read it if you haven't read it yet. We've got a few questions coming in. Don't forget to put some questions in if you're wanting to ask some questions. We've got some people with us from the book too, which is pretty cool. So rare opportunity to ask some questions. It's like an interactable book tonight. So so far we've got Frankie saying, congrats, Kathy. My question, how much time per week did you spend writing the book?
5 years.
Per week?
It was the beginning of April 2016 when I started, and I wrote the last story in January this year. I probably spent all of the first year working on Pat Toole's story. That took me until Christmas. I did Nancy Bird's in about 3 months, and then I did George's. George's was fast because I'd already written about her. So I just took what I already knew and then asked her to fill in the blanks. I reckon, so Julie Skinner, I think, is online tonight. And Julie was living with us and she was like a mother. She would say, go and sit in the office and just write the book. And so some weeks I could do 9 to 5 or 6, 5 days a week. But without Julie there, I could spend maybe 3 hours a day. But I had other jobs. I also edit Air Sport magazine for the Sport Aircraft Association. So and I've got a family, so I can't really answer that. Every spare moment. Yeah.
Well, at least it's out now, so that's good.
5 years. It just took 5 years. Too long, according to my husband.
So Sue Frangu, my mum, asks, do you have a favorite story, Kathy?
Favorite story? No, because that would be a bit insulting to the others. I love them all like they're my own, and I want to bring all of them home to live with me so we can chat and have a cup of tea. Probably Pat, because she was the one that got it started and because her story was so inspiring, and I saw the effect of that story on the group at the time. I think Lynn Gray, that's a hell of a story. And so when someone says, when Matt Hall said, when his secretary said, we've only got like 5 days to get through this, which part of the story, which part of the book should he go to? And I said, Pat Toole, Lynn Gray and Georgia Maxwell. Lynn and Georgia because they live in New South Wales, not far from him, but they're also very strong stories. Nicole's a favourite because I just love her. Esther's a favourite because she's great. Marion's a favourite because, she got up and learnt to fly at 50 and she's so gracious about it. So, yeah, everybody has something. No one favourite.
Jennifer Laird says, looking at my logbook now, and I've just found an entry where I flew with Lynn in a flying competition out of Warnervale, New South Wales on the 17th of September 2000.
Who won? Jen, who won?
She's shrugging.
She doesn't know. Who cares? It's all about the flying and the fun. It's like the book. It doesn't matter who's the biggest or the fastest or the first, it's just about the great stories. So it's just like a conversation. That's what I wanted it to be.
Exactly. There's a couple questions here, which includes, how did you choose whose stories to include with so many amazing and inspirational women around us? And was it a hard choice?
How did I choose? Well, I had Pat to start with, and then I thought I have to include Nancy because the 3rd Sydney Airport's being named after her. And I felt that people needed to know who she was and why. And I felt that Nancy had been kind of glamorized and beatified, over the years. And I just wanted to talk about what she actually did, which was she only flew for 4 or 5 or 6 years, something. It wasn't 3 years training and 3 years in the outback. And she gained a reputation for that. And she stood firmly on that pioneer pedestal and launched her career, which was mostly public relations. As Dick Smith said, her greatest asset was her ability for public relations. And through that, she was able to make things happen, things that interested her, and such as helping start the New South Wales Air Ambulance Service, and she started the Women Pilots Association, and so I just felt that she had to be included, but I wanted to tell it my way. Pat, so that Marty Gething, how could you not include somebody who flew in, all those aeroplanes, the who's who of fighter aircraft in World War II? That's such a unique and interesting story. I couldn't believe my luck when I found that one, so that had to go in. I was advised to try and get a spread of geography, so as that when, from a marketing point of view, you could, and I'm finding this with Tasmania on Monday, I'm speaking to ABC Tasmania. 2 radio stations have said, are there any Tasmanians in the book? And the answer is no. There's one fantastic story in Tasmania, but I was told that that lady's very private, and so I didn't want to be the person to go and pressure her to into telling her story, because once it's in ink, it's there forever. It goes in the National Library, and it's there forever. So if she doesn't want to tell that story, I don't want to try and talk her into it. So there was a spread of geography, and then I kind of just went one through each decade. Deborah Laurie had to go in. Once I heard about Lynn Gray's story, I couldn't let that go. I was so pleased when she said yes. Yeah, so that's how it went. Also, it's access, and sorry, also the story has to have a long story. Like a lot of people have, quite a few people have asked me if I've included Senya Roby. Now, everyone who knows her knows she was the most beautiful lady and competent and capable, and she flew. She only retired at something like 88 or something, and but when I spoke to her, I asked her, and I couldn't get out of her enough. She was too safe, she never force landed on a mountain, or there wasn't enough drama to warrant creating a story out of it. Otherwise, it would be more like a biography, and I didn't want that. I wanted edge of your seat, let's make a movie out of it type drama. So the drama element was important. That was a long answer.
There is something very cinematic about all of them. I think you could all watch them as a movie.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty cool. Just like our interview on my podcast, we have 2 question statements, one of which is from James saying, following the previous questions, how about a volume 2? And Catherine saying, can we look forward to a second book?
Who's Catherine? I know who James is.
Catherine just says Catherine, so I'm not sure.
Who are you, Catherine? Who is it? We don't know. Catherine Fitzsimons, maybe? No. Can we look forward to book 2? I don't know. It takes a lot of effort, and I've got to get 3 kids through school yet.
That's true. You need another someone to help you out around the house to get it done.
Yeah.
We also have Linda saying, I hope these stories inspire our current young generation to push through the obstacles in front of them. A book to be shared. There's heaps of great comments too. And we have James saying, a question for Georgia.
Who's
have
that
you,
from?
James?
Oh, James, yeah.
Question for Georgia. Have you had girls ask you about becoming a pilot? What do you say to them? You can refer them to the book now in parentheses.
Hi, James. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Yes, definitely. I've had people ask me about being a pilot, the industry, what's it like. And my advice is always be true to yourself. Make sure you're ready to be one of the boys, because you don't want to be a girly girl in this industry. And you've got to be prepared to do a lot of hard work to get to be a pilot. You've got to, you've got to do the mixing, the truck driving, the cleaning. You've got to do all the crappy jobs before you get to be a glamorous pilot with helmet hair.
Or get on the cover. You don't get on the cover by sitting on the couch.
Well, that looks like just about it for the questions. No one's got anything to sneak in quickly before we wrap it up? No one's nodding, no one's typing? Will you be issuing logoed T-shirts from Kathy?
I have got tea-towels. This is the funny thing that's come out of this, is that there's John Toole. That's Pat Toole's son. Hi, John. The funny thing that came out of it was when the book went to print, it was like the kids leaving home, and so I didn't quite know what to do with myself, and it was very like, what do I do with my hands now when I'm not typing stories or editing? And one night I decided, I think I'll design some handbags, one for each story in the book, because that just seemed like what had to happen next. And we got 3 of the bags made, and they're on the website. One of them relates to Georgia in the pink work shirt. And then I had a good mind as what's the word for you? Alias? Yeah, Ida Goodmind. I wrote a book of cartoons last year under the name of Ida Goodmind, and from that came all these silly stick figures that I drew that related to the little stories. And so this one was called Girls Fly Too, and I'm flying away from you. But after somebody had upset her, but I took the last bit off. So I thought she needed actually to get an airing. So I just got these tea towels the other day, but they're on the website too. So that's been good fun. Yeah. What else? What's next?
Everyone's suggesting coffee mugs. So.
Oh, you want coffee mugs? What would you like on the coffee mugs? Do you want me to draw? I have to do another Ida Goodmind to
Is this big enough to go on the, you know?
I think we just put Georgia on the coffee mug. We get her back in a bikini on the wing of an 802, and she can be, and then I could draw it like Ida Goodmind, just the way, you know, the wartime pilots had, you know, the women on the nose of the plane. We could have Georgia on the coffee mug coming at you.
We've got a shout out as well. Say hello to Marion from Vicky Key, old 1974 Memorial Grant Coordinator.
Vicky got a book the other day. Carol Den, who's the past national president of Women Pilots Association, she sent a copy to Vicky. So I hope you're enjoying it, Vicky.
Website address, please, Kathy.
kathymexted.com.au.
And you can people can email you to get a copy of the book.
Well, now that's a bit of a problem
because
we've sold out.
Oh.
So I didn't back myself in this. I wasn't prepared for this thing to blow up the way it has. So I've only got enough books left for the book launch lunch thing for the Victorian women in a couple of weeks, and everyone else is on a waiting list, and the publisher promised they'd send me another 2 cartons, but I sold a carton in about 36 hours. So I don't know how we're going to go. But the bookshop in Woodend said to me the second print run is already sold out, and the publisher said they won't do a 3rd print run until early next year, because what happens is bookshops are able to hold on to a book, and then if they don't like it after a certain time, they can send it back to the publisher. They're called returns. And so they don't want to just keep printing books until they know that they've gone. The publisher doesn't want to end up with 5,000 books. They've printed 5,000 times. You've gone out there, Georgia, on that wing. How does that make you feel?
There was a yay.
Yay.
Yeah.
There was a point where I said to Georgia, what have we done? Yeah, so they can email me and I can put them on the list and hope that I can get the books from the publisher.
This is a good question too, from Harrison. Can we get it as an ebook?
Is that my son? Is he online?
I'm not sure.
No. You can get it as an ebook starting today, I believe.
He says yes.
Yeah, you can. Elaine's nodding over the thing. Is it my son?
I presume he says yes, so yeah.
Hello, he's in West Australia. Can I talk about Harrison for a minute? He just finished his flight training and he got best pilot on course. So we're very proud of that.
Good job. Also, pre-ordering copies from bookstores.
You can go to Booktopia, and you can go to bookstores, and you can, Big W are going to have them cheap if you're short of cash. Go to Big W, buy them up and send them to me so I can on-sell them.
Yeah, make a profit.
Because we run out. You got to hold on to them. If you get a book, hold on to it.
Yeah, my mum says I'm going to Big W. Lol.
To get the whole 5.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, I think thanks to everyone for coming. It's been an amazing event, and it's great to hear Kathy speak and talk through some of her favorite parts of the book and introduce it to everyone. So it's very good. I'm lucky I got my copy. So does it mean it's more valuable now that it's really rare?
Yeah, yours is the first print run with the mistakes in it.
Mm.
That's very rare. It has F-111 fighter jet. It's not a fighter jet, it's a bomber.
So I'll hold on to it and sell it for 10 years, and then I'll sell it at a profit then.
New Guinea is not a territory. It was not a colony. It was a protectorate. And G for George doesn't hang from the ceiling like I thought. Oh, the bloody thing was way up there. I thought it was hanging from the ceiling, but it sits on its wheels on a plinth, and look, detail.
So what's the hotline for all the mistake call-ins?
Just 10pilots@gmail.
Collect
Well,
all
it's too late now. It's gone to the second print run. So we fixed them up before it went off.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks to everyone for coming and sharing this with us, and cheers to Kathy for her amazing book.
I can't believe we did it. I can't quite believe it's out
Congratulations.
there. And I thank you all for your part that you played in it and for your ongoing support, which has been really something special. I didn't know I had so many friends.
Cheers.
I've got
Thank
one
you.
here. I've got one here with me. She turned up when I got famous.
Cheers.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheers.
See you guys.
Thank you.